Super duper, we are live. Hello everyone, welcome to Anchore Open Source Gardening, where we do some work while you watch. We've got we got a full house today. Is this everyone? Anyone missing? I think it's everyone. Yeah. Wow. Hello Alex, Will, Chris, Dan, Keith. These are the wonderful open source developers who look after all the tools that we have at Anchore, including Syft and Grype. We are live. Hang on, everyone. I need to mute something. Welcome to Anchore Open Source Gardening, where we do some work while you watch. I've got a loopback thing. Somewhere there is a video playing. We got a full house today. Is this? Bear with me. There we go. It's gone. Whew, that was close. Nobody noticed, I'm sure. So yes, these are the maintainers of all the wonderful open source tools, and if you file bugs or give us any kind of feedback or notification of anything, then these are the people who are going to work on those issues, and some of that work will be done right now. A couple of things I wanted to mention. On the screen right now, it says Syft has 7,025 stars on GitHub. Which I guess if there's one of these things, yeah, that one links. Is that true? Yes. Do you know that hit 7,005 on Monday, and when I was doing the stats, I didn't even notice. I didn't notice that had hit 7,005. Also worth noting, Stereoscope is 99. Who's going to be the 100th person to put a star on Stereoscope? Come on, someone's going to do it. Maybe while we're doing this, someone will do that. We can be hopeful. Anyway, how is everyone doing?
Well, so far so good.
Peachy. Excellent. Somewhere I've got a chat window open. Right. Anyone got a suggestion of what we're going to talk about today?
Well, I had one not too difficult one, I think, to chat through. I put a link in the chat.
Wonderful stuff.
A PR from our good friend Dan Loring.
Nice.
And the gist of the PR is we made a change in Syft. So when we determine the ownership by overlap, we resolve symlinks to determine if a file is the same or not. And this has to do with things claiming that they own them. So a package manager, for example, if you have Python installed, it's, I own the Python binary or something like that. Some packages, they install a symlink, and some packages should actually own the file, and some packages shouldn't own the file. And so this has kind of caused a little bit of a problem because what we're doing is resolving all of them, regardless of multiple things claiming ownership. And so this PR is basically just, it looks at all the other packages that we found and determines if something else claims ownership for the same thing, in which case we don't claim ownership for the thing that claims a symlink. And my main question was just like, can we simplify this a little bit? And one of the things in the PR, like I guess the most specific thing is the way that it's implemented, which could be perfectly fine, is it only checks the same file type. So let's say I have an APK file and I have an RPM file, and the APK claims ownership for something, and the RPM has a symlink to the same thing. In this case, it would not count, and then both of them would claim ownership. And my question was, like, do we need to be that granular? Is it good enough if we just find something that claims ownership? That's like the gist of it.
Find something that claims ownership, meaning if we already found another package that claimed ownership.
Right. Does it need to be the same package type?
I mean, it's the upside of checking for the same package type is that it's it's looking, I mean, that's a good question. Like for me, it's like it's kind of common for OS packages to do this kind of trick where like one package lays down the actual binary, the other one lays down the symlinks that point to the binary. And you want to defer to the one that truly has the binary in these cases. Yeah, I guess if we remove the restriction of it having to be the same package type, what are the weird things that can happen? I mean, I feel like a binary package picks up on one, and then like a symlink is owned by another. I don't know, but then again, if the OS package owns both the symlink and the binary, and then we have another binary package that owns the binary, then we're still going to defer to the OS package in that case.
Right. Right. This is specifically for binary. Yeah, for binary things.
So I'm trying to understand the situation a little better, because I feel like I'm really surprised to learn that like I can install multiple packages and that one of the packages owns a file, right? And then a different package owns symlinks to that file. That's the situation we're talking about. So let's just use curl, right? So like the way this got introduced is we fixed a bug a while back where on some distros /bin is owned by packages, but /usr/bin is a symlink to /bin. And so we fixed an issue where if you did like apt-get install curl, then you'd get like bin curl would be owned by the package, but user bin curl wouldn't, but they're the same file, right? Via the symlink. And so so we fixed that, but now we're running into a situation where like one package was installed and say it put the binary at bin curl, and then another package was installed and it put the symlink user bin curl pointing to bin curl, and we attribute incorrectly the ownership of bin curl to both packages. Is that it? Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure I understood with sort of a toy example. Alan, is user bin a link? Can you do ls minus? Can you just see if user bin itself is a link? Maybe file -- no dereference or whatever.
I think it's
Yeah.
bin is a link. Yeah.
Oh, /bin is the link. I explained it back. Yeah, that's what was tripping us up. And so then people would put files at the binary classifier would find a file at like bin curl, but the package would claim to own user bin curl or vice versa.
And if I could add one other thing, like let's keep in mind, this is for things for claimed ownership. This is not for linked locations that we found things. This is for a package manager explicitly saying, I own this file here. And so there's the file owner interface that we have that is for the specific metadata types have that. But this is not the same thing as like we scanned a location and that's the location that we found the binary.
So can we tell? So it sounds to me like in this hypothetical situation, we have basically two packages and they need the same binary to be in different places, right? So one of them actually brings the binary and the other one symlinks to where it thinks the binary will be. And if we uninstall the second package, we'd remove the symlink, but not the binary, right?
Right.
Right.
Okay. I wonder if that's written down somewhere. Like if we can tell that the ownership is like linky, or if that's just somebody's doing ln-s in install.sh and we can never figure it out in a machine readable way.
You're saying, well, I mean, from the package metadata point of view, we really just get a list of strings.
Right.
We don't, and so that's kind of one of the problems, is that we don't know if the string is the real path, a path that does not have any symlinks in it, or except for the leaf, or if it isn't. So like that's because it's just a list of strings, and so yeah, someone could be doing something like in a PostScript doing a link, and thus like we're kind of invisible to it. or it's explicitly listed out, it kind of doesn't matter in a sense. I mean, ideally, we actually want, like, so we have this, of course, the file resolver that's responsible for being able to look at like multi-dimensional file systems and give back resolved locations. And we don't have an LSTAT equivalent through that interface. And so in the most ideal case, we would add LSTAT, some equivalent of LSTAT to that, so we could say, the thing that we resolved to is specifically a symlink. That would be a little more work, mostly because we have to be mucking with that interface, which is fairly large, and we already have like 4 or 5 implementations of, and so it would be a little involved. And so that's why I think something like the approach that Dan's taking here kind of makes sense, because it's a simple heuristic without having to go and change the file resolver.
Right. So we're basically saying, like, in the case that, like, the package that claims it owns a file, like the package will say, I own this path, and the path is just a string. We don't know anything about it. If that path is a link, not a regular file, and we have some other owner for the target of that link, then the person who owns the real the target of the link is the real owner of the file.
Yeah.
Or the package, not person. Sorry, anthropomorphizing a little too much. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess, like, so going back to, like, I think that, like, generally speaking, this is just fine. I get my real question was, like, specifically about simplifying the PR. I think if we could just say, if anything claims ownership of, if anything, regardless of the package type, claims ownership of the file, like, then we don't resolve the symlink. If that was acceptable, then, like, we could simplify the PR, I think, considerably. And that was really the gist of my question. Or do we, like, is there some specific reason that we should be restricting it to just the same type? So just the APK package manager packages. If one of those claims ownership for the same thing, do we not resolve it?
So right now, what you're saying is that, like, if we had let's say a deb that owns user bin curl, which is a symlink to bin curl, and then we have an APK that owns bin curl, we would still attribute it to both ownerships because they're not the same kind of package. Is that's what's done here, and you're not sure we should do it that way. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. That's what's done here, and I guess I'm not sure if it's really necessary, but I think it's going to be a pretty rare case that we have multiple things that are claiming ownership of the same file that are different types. But I mean, it is something that could potentially happen.
Yeah, something tells me the cross OS package type isn't going to pop up all that much, right? Because it's unusual to have different OS types installed simultaneously. Not impossible, but it's a little unusual. But I am trying to think about the other cataloger implications, like the Python package one might claim ownership of some files, and the RPM that installed that Python package also is claiming ownership. I'm not exactly sure, but there might be some considerations for that definition of different type. Like OS types are one thing, but all of the other types are kind of another in my mind.
Yeah, I'm trying to, like, go through all the permutations of the other types, and that's where, like, I'm kind of in an infinite loop, so to speak, because it's hard to really think through, like, okay, if I got a Rust package versus NPM, or if I got Python versus Haskell, like, what are the implications for file owner and ownership here in general? That's what makes me steer towards, it may be a little more complicated in the implementation, but, like, from what this is doing, it's easier to reason about, like, it's only going to be APKs and APKs. Python packages and Python packages, and it's easier to say, oh yeah, we have the same mechanisms of detecting file ownership within those package types, so to speak. And so it's kind of easier to think about. I'm not saying you're wrong though. Like this could be simpler if we think that assumption can be lifted. I just am having a hard time thinking through that assumption because I think it opens up more cans of worms, so to speak.
Yeah, I think maybe the answer is what you said, that like this is definitely a safer thing, probably. So I think that answers the question. That's, you know, at least from my perspective, that.
Yeah. I'm trying to go through the rest of the PR now, trying to make sure I understand the rest of it. Like, I actually thought there would be something here that looked at a location's, like, you know, at a resolved location's real path versus like the access path to see if it was a symlink. But yeah, I just need to look closer at this.
I think
offline.
it's, yeah, I think it does. It compares the path with it. I think pretty sure it does that at some
Okay,
point.
it does. I missed it. It's here somewhere. Hi. I'll review that offline. So. Well then, anything else on this one?
Are we done with that one?
Yep.
Cool. Has someone just posted another link, or is that the same one?
Oh, that was just the line
code.
in question.
Sweet.
Thank you.
So what we normally do around about this time is we go and find anything that needs discussion.
I had one thing possibly to bring up before we go to the needs discussion.
Okay.
All right. Sorry. Let me pull this up. Okay. So I made a draft PR this morning. I linked it in our chat. And this attempts to address an issue in the Grype DB config where, given one of our providers is long-term status 404, 503, just some provider is exhibiting like a long period of downtime, we want the ability to configure ignoring that provider's date, not the data, so that we can publish a database for V5 where the date that gets put onto the archive is not the 404 or provider that is interminably broken for longer than the 5-day threshold. What I found when doing this PR was that our calculate earliest timestamp is shared between V5 and V6. And I wanted kind of a group input on if we should decouple that, or if there was a reason to update the V6 config to be able to also account for this. Because there was an archive path I was a little unsure of that does calculate the earliest date for V6.
I think I wanted to kind of take a step back and explain a little bit from a little bit farther away what we're talking about, and it might help us get to an answer to the question. So Grype downloads a new database of vulnerability data. That's all the vulnerabilities we know about. And one of the things Grype does is it fails if the data is too old. It's like, hey, and it can't get updated data, right? It's like, hey, this is, you know, you're claiming to do a security scan, but your database is super old. So I'm not going to claim I did a security scan because you don't have current vulnerability data and the stuff is time sensitive. But one of the things that happened, one of our providers was down from Thursday until this morning. And so we weren't able to rebuild that provider's Grype database. And so I think on V5, we had, right, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but people were they were trying to run a Grype scan on an old version of Grype that uses schema V5, and it was bailing because the SUSE Linux data was too old. It was more than 5 days old. And so they weren't able to get a scan. And so that's what we're sort of dealing with is the balance between like, we don't want users to think they're running a scan when it's super old, especially if it's like in CI or something, and they might not see a log.warn, hey, this is old data. But we also need to be able to protect users. Like if a data source we don't control or they're not using is offline, then we want some way of letting them continue to work.
Right.
Is that
Said another way, if the most recent bit of data from a provider is still 10 days old, we want to be able to provide that to the user and have them run a correct scan, because it's not that we're using out-of-date data. We're using the most recent data. It just happens to have a timestamp of being published 5 to 6 days ago.
see that's interesting because like if like in this case the provider was operationally down, so it'd say we are using out of date data, we're using their latest, but if you
Right.
think you're getting up to today vulnerability scans, you're wrong on this particular distro. I wonder, I think in v6 land we could try to do something because we have a date per provider, right? And so we could try to say like, hey, I am going to fail because the SUSE Linux data is really old and you are scanning a SUSE Linux image, and not bother people who are like scanning a Red Hat image because the SUSE data is out of date. But we couldn't do that in v5, I don't think.
That's where I was confused with this PR, because Alan, if you go into the files changed on this, there's a section under the v6 changes called archive.go. Should be on the left-hand side. You can see process v6 archive. Yep. And then we're still calling earliest timestamp here for archiving and building the DB in this file. If you open this whole file, it gives more context to what we're doing in v6 for archive. But the point of like bringing this up during the session was, okay, do we need like a design or the kind of talk about it amongst the team of, if we're still doing this archive where we're pulling eldest out, does v6 need to know about having to ignore providers that are out of date if we want to like timestamp it to the correct thing?
I'm just gonna say my opinion here, which definitely may not be other people's opinion, but if we just took the most recent timestamp, if I understand it, this is for basically saying what the age of the database itself is. Is that accurate? So if we took the most recent timestamp instead of the oldest timestamp, then potentially, like, we could be in a situation like that if all the providers were down. We were rebuilding a database with, but that's a pretty unlikely thing to happen.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, there's a V5 versus V6ism, and this might have been mentioned, but like, so V5 is behaving differently than V6. So V6, actually, let me start with V5. V5 has the built date is what it's called, and that was really a poorly named field from day one, because it wasn't actually the build of the database. Like that was not what that field represented. It really was the data age, like what you guys were talking about. And in V6, this was corrected. So now it actually does represent the build of the database. So like, hey, if I built the database yesterday, even with old data, so the built age, or I should say the built date, is representing when we ran Grype DB build. So I think that's why we're seeing a difference between V5 and V6 here, and like V5 is the one that's failing, is because it has this, like, your oldest provider is going to be the one that's causing the failure, which is it's a bit of a problem. Like we definitely want to be able to say your database is out of date, but then assuming that every provider can be updated, that's I think where we go like a little too far on the assumptions, which is why like it's the V6 behaves as, hey, did you pull your a database that has been built recently, like so, and then trust whoever's building that database to properly put as much data, the latest data that you possibly can.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
that does make sense, but I think that the V5 behavior of saying I'm going to exit non-zero because I do not have a new enough vulnerability database for you to make real decisions here is an important safety mechanism. Do we have that like in V6? Do we still do that, or do we just check the date that you got the database?
Yeah, it's the date the database was built, and so we and it's true, we want to be able to say, like, because we have all the providers timestamps in the database, but we're kind of unpinned I think that assumption in V5 that, like, if you have one provider, no matter what provider it is, fail, because that's just not the right call. So you're right. There's
Right.
probably a better behavior we can do. Maybe it's based, just like what you said, off of the contents of what you're scanning. But that has not been like re-implemented, so to speak. Like, so we still have the protection of if you're not getting a newly built database, like that protection is still in place, we will still fail. Because like that, I think that premise is still correct. Like, we want to fail if you're not getting new updates. But yeah, I don't think there's a proposal that's really been put down on how to do looking at the contents and looking at like the provider dates. What's the right like function, like the right formula we want to put there to say and fail.
That unblocks me on this PR, that clarification of like where the dates are, only because now I understand even though we should look at this more in depth. The earliest timestamp has some weird self-knowledge about when to skip NVD. Like, specifically NVD is hard coded in there, like if it's too old. So maybe there's a bit more of a refactor here, like getting this earliest timestamp to like stop caring about individual providers and maybe doing it outside of it. But I'm unblocked in knowing that the V5 and V6ism, the dates coming back from earliest timestamp are different based on what is being built. So that helps me.
Yeah, and the spot that you pointed out, Chris, in the archive.go is really affecting the file name and is not actually being used logically downstream. It's just, you could put Mary Poppins there and it's still going to work.
Yeah.
So we're good there. There's other legacy reasons why that earliest timestamp is in the file name. Yeah, Will.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it is like the right time to talk about like sort of what our ideal behavior is in terms of letting users know, like, hey, this isn't working, because we have a couple of situations where it's relevant. I think we have things like old Debian, where Debian doesn't host the vulnerabilities anymore and they're not disclosing them anymore. We still have a cache of them. So if you scan like a super old unsupported Debian, I think like maybe 6 and 7 are the ones that we do this for. So that's one where like we sort of know that the vulnerability provider for Debian 7 has been taken down, but we still have like the last known set of Debian 7 vulnerabilities in the Grype database. And then there's things where we have NVD, where NVD has had some, I think, operational and maybe like political difficulties continuing to do their thing. And so we put in an exception there where we won't fail a V5 matching just because the NVD database is old, because it could be down for a while, but also because we only use the NVD database as the last resort. So it's sort of safer to run with an old NVD than it is to run with like an old rel, assuming that you're scanning a rel image.
Right. Because
and
if
then
you're
we-
scanning Alpine, then like it's a totally different answer. Because
Right, exactly. And then we had most recently, we had like an operational blip where all the SUSE Linux data was just missing for several days. And so I think that, so one of the things the Grype database now has in it is it has the timestamp when each provider ran, right? Like when each provider succeeded. Like if you do
Uh,
Grype DB providers, you get a timestamp when the data was pulled. I didn't read the
right.
implementation of that command, but
I think it's the data being pulled. So it's like when the
right,
data was
right.
compiled. So yeah.
Exactly. Right, there's the command Grype DB providers, which basically includes the timestamp as of which the data in the database is current for each data source. That might make sense to run if we could put a terminal with Grype DB providers up.
Yeah.
But
I'm actually
I
still,
think, go ahead. I was
well,
going to say, I think it might make sense for each matcher to say, like, hey, I was just asked about a Ruby gem and my GHSA data is old. I was just asked about a D package. My Debian data is old, right? Where each matcher could return like an error provider too old, or each, if that makes sense. Um,
well, the matcher and the providers are not really coupled in that
they're
way.
not one to one. True. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially now that like namespaces are gone. And so
Right.
if we still had something like namespaces where there's like these, swimming lanes in the database for what you searched in, it kind of, that makes a lot of sense. But there's also another thing I wanted to comment on about specifically the Debian example you gave, where we have this very old legacy data that's not hosted anymore. It's not being pulled anymore. But that's within a provider where there is still getting updates. And it's really shadowing the fact that, I guess I want to point out is that within one provider, there's actually several different data sets that are in play. And it might be that a portion of that data is stale and another portion is very much not stale, but like we can't even tell today that case. And so try just using the provider date information, I actually don't think is like good enough to detect like, oh, I'm scanning Debian 7, it's up to date. And I feel like we actually need another mechanism. I kind of think there's two use cases here. Like the one use case is the one that you were mentioning, Will. It's I am scanning, my matcher is pulling data, and like from whatever was pulled and referenced, like what's my most up-to-date stuff, or what's my oldest timestamps. I'm going to hand wave at some details there. That's like the at scan time use case. And the other one is I am like a system admin, and I just want to know, is Grype okay generically? So I want to do this like Grype DB check or something, some similar command to say, do I have the latest data? Do I not? Is something stale? Aside from having to use any images whatsoever to scan. And Chris, you had your hand up too. I don't know if you're.
No, you've got to the core of what I was trying to say, but we already have the latter's information, the date captured, which is the status of I'm an operator, is Grype okay? Every provider can say like when they were captured, but I was looking at the revised models for V6 and we don't have the former, which is what's the actual age of the data relative to T now? As in like am I using data that was 2 years out of date? Like where do we get that now in V6? I was looking for it and can't find it.
It's actually the date captured. It is that the new so the new field is, so that's like the last time that Funnel was run essentially for that provider. Yeah, well,
Right. Right. But I was going to say, like you were saying, that doesn't prove that Funnel succeeded, right? Or I mean, it proves that like Funnel succeeded in the sense that it exited 0 and wrote a results database, but it doesn't prove that Funnel succeeded in the sense that like maybe vulnerability for this distro is no longer hosted, and so the Funnel provider is just like waking up, writing down the same thing it wrote down yesterday and going back to sleep every day. And so that reminds me of another request we have in Grype, which is to add metadata to the vulnerability where the record says, this is my update time. I think there are probably a couple requests for that, but that would be interesting, right? Because then you can see, because that's really what it is. It's like, hey, I pulled, and some of the providers have this where we can say like this record claims it was changed at this timestamp, and we could capture that and bring it forward. That might be what people want. I don't know.
Are you talking about, I'll put this in the chat. This is like Funnel 742, capturing the date timestamps in BOM data.
Yeah, and I recently saw a new Grype issue that I think is sort of a dupe of this.
Yeah.
And that's what made me think of it. But I think
Uh-oh.
Yeah, like another way maybe to connect that dot would be to say like the most recent timestamp of any record for a given data source would be some way to describe this data source was last updated, the data source, you know, in its entirety, not by Funnel or by us, but by the provider of the data source at time t, like the, yeah, which I don't know if that's something we capture at the moment. It's
Yeah.
implicit, but yeah.
No, you're right. I mean, we've had requests for that, and I believe, and so we can start doing that. I mean, I think everything in like the data path allows us to be able to capture first seen, so to speak.
Yeah.
But part of this, so like for the case, Will, you're talking about, for knowing, am I going to get new vulnerability data or not? Like, is it possible? Like, we've had requests. If this is the Grype 2083, it's like being able to add EOL detection. So even if I come back and I get absolutely no results, so I think my image is great, I still probably want to be able to fail if my base image is EOL. And this fits kind of in that category. So if you're really using those old Debian images, yeah, we're going to try to do our best with this old data, but there's probably a whole decade of vulnerabilities it's not going to detect. Thus, like, I still want it to fail. Maybe some configurable threshold there, but like, hey, this is end of life. Like, there is no,
It's not
no
that,
data
it's not
source
that
for
you
this.
have no vulnerabilities. It's that no one has been doing research on this distro or publishing data about it for the past 5 years.
right.
Yeah.
I think it's the Ubuntu tracker. Where they'll match, like, they'll say this is unreviewed because EOL, right? They'll just say like, whatever, OpenSSL and Ubuntu 16.04. It's just, we didn't review that because no one is working on this distro anymore. I think Grype reports that as vulnerable, but I think other distros handle it by just not doing anything about the report because it's EOL, or not putting it. So anyway.
I do agree there's probably some complexity. So if there's like 3 states or timestamps, just for example, like the upstream provider, which has nothing to do with us, has updated this source at time t. Funnel was successfully able to do whatever it does for that source at time x, and your version of the Grype database is time y. The one that concerns me is the one we don't have control over, because there could be some variance. Timestamps might not be sufficient, right? Like a provider might actually put a record in the data source that says, we're not reviewing this because it's EOL. So a timestamp might bump, but what's in the data is actually saying we're not reviewing it, right? So I just want to, we got to watch out for that one. I think we have to make sure we're not necessarily just triggering off of like last updated from upstream.
Yeah, that's true. That's the Homer Simpson equivalent of like putting the bird on the keyboard. Yeah.
Ubuntu just writes a bot that constantly modifies their vulnerabilities, and we go, oh yeah, this is great. You're getting refreshed data.
Right.
I think it's a valuable timestamp to try to capture. It's just, I think we need, I think it might vary across the data sources. Yeah.
So we have, all right, so we have like the ones on the screen, which is like the claimed from the provider. We have first seen, we have when Funnel captured it. And I think, Dan, you said a third one.
That's more into like the operational one. Like I have Grype on my computer and it has a database. Like, is it up to date?
Yeah, man, every record's gonna have so many timestamps.
And naming them really complicated.
Yeah, we're like batting 1,000 already on naming some of these because I have confused the timestamp names already in this call.
Oh yeah, like day one, like the first timestamp field that we had, was just named wrong, and like we couldn't change it because there was going to be a breaking change. So it's, oh yes. Now there's this many, I guess. Well, I think we just said 5 or 6 different kinds of timestamps. Like, yeah, man.
Got to build a dictionary. Got to build some docs for it again.
Yeah, I feel like a table where it's like literally timestamp A, B, C, D, E, and then there's a table that says what it means might actually be a good choice.
No, that's a good idea. And a little bit about what it implies. But I like listing the like, this is EOL, right? Like you're scanning a Debian 7 image in 2025 and we didn't find anything, but that's not because there's nothing to find. It's because no one is reviewing security reports against this distro. You should upgrade your distro. But anyway, yeah, so that would be an interesting, because it's not really vulnerability data, but I would love to do this. And I think that they wrote back and said, I think we initially said that there's not an API we can use, and the requester has
Now there
written
is.
back and said now there is. So if somebody wants to build a funnel provider that makes a list of end of life distros and packages and stuff, that'd be super cool. I would love to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, maybe we could get to it too. But
Yeah, like
definitely contributions welcome here.
Would that
definitely.
require it to be done in Funnel and then GrypeDB and Grype as well?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. It's just one of those three repo PRs. Maybe someday down to 2, because I think we might merge GrypeDB and Grype into one repo eventually. But
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm going to
it's-
stop the clock on when we were going to mention merging those two. 42 minutes, not bad, not bad. Well done.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. It's in the 98% chance here. So, yeah. But no, I think if anyone is interested in doing 2083 here, I think the last time that we all chatted about this, we said like ideally this would come in 2 phases. One is like something that lands that just focuses on distros, and then another enhancement that lands that focuses on packages. Because like the packages, there's a lot more thought that's going to need to go into it about how it's going to match and like how to really pair up that data. Whereas with distros, it's a lot more straightforward. And also there's a lot of value right up front saying like, hey, your whole distro is EOL. Like maybe think about moving on to the next thing. So.
Is that something that you could show in the same way with like a flat at the moment when in Grype, I'm not articulating this particularly well. In Grype, I'm trying to think of an example where we do it, and I think I have one.
Talk about those pills, like the pills at the right, or
oh my gosh, the tab completion thing, please.
An example would be like a Perl file with 2 different distros would show.
Oh man. So yeah, there's is that what you call them, pills at the end that says that it's so this one I think has a known exploited vulnerability or something does. I thought it was this one. It may be something else. Oh my life, this is big.
yeah.
Why don't
Kev's use the pill UX patterns. Yeah, looks like a little pill. So whereas like some of the other ones, there's like a little auxiliary data. So yeah, those Kevs are pills. Yep.
I love those. I live for those. I hope to see more of these little things. So what, a little thing in there that says EOL would be just glorious.
Yes. Yeah, it could. And like, you're right. Like in the sense of there's like a UX challenge here. Cause let's just say that we're talking about distros. Well, saying that like every one of those packages is EOL is a bit of a, like it gets very noisy very quick. Whereas, but if you try to do it any other way than by package, you need to put something else like a table below this table that still lets you know like, hey, here's the like major components that are EOL to list your distro. I would say that's a bit of a like unsolved problem, like because from the JSON point of view, it's kind of easier to solve. It's like you can explicitly list the things that are EOL'd, and it's okay if it's noisy. But for like a summary table, like what's the right way to do it? Annotate your table with everything, or make another table. So I don't.
Can you make it flash? Can you make it like make it a massive font or something just like really offensive? Yeah, I'm not a designer. Yeah, don't ask me. I'm not the right person for that. Nice. Yes, I would love to see that as well. Who can we nerd snipe into doing this in Vunnel first? That would be awesome.
Good question.
Mm.
Maybe someone who's watching.
Maybe. Any other items that people want to mention before I dive in? We've got 15 minutes left. I think there were a couple of needs discussions.
Yeah, I think the top needs discussion, that Perl Debian distro codename one, that one's a good one.
Syft 3902.
And there's even today people are chatting about it. So okay.
So what's this one about? To add the code name in the Perls.
Well, specifically to only put the code name in the Perl. Today we put the distro name dash version. And that's not really what the Perl examples have, although I don't think that there's anything that definitively says what's supposed to go there.
That's correct. They basically said there's a distro qualifier, and then they only have a couple examples, and then beyond that, there is no other verbiage that says what is the correct things that should go in here.
Right. And
Where is that in this document here?
Well, I think you're on it. Where
some example, one example. There's another one there.
Maybe it's in the types document. Yeah, there are a couple of examples. If you look at like the deb type.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I have this whole thing bookmarked. This is
Right. And
always referencing documentation.
yeah.
Wait, I don't see anything that has like, it's a PURL modifier like the and distro Jesse, and so that's
Right.
For some reason, I thought we were doing Debian dash Jesse, and I was like, that I've never seen that before in my life.
We got Debian
Also,
dash a number.
I mean, I guess these are examples where some have the distro and some don't. I guess, yeah, not everything is complete in there because, like the Ubuntu one, there would be good to have the distro in, but you know,
Yeah.
But the parameter, like, are any of the parameters required according to the spec? Or I thought
no,
I think
URL
on the-
params are optional.
completely variable, whatever you like. So we're only going off of examples of what you might want in there. There's no actual spec that says what's right and wrong or minimum required or anything, right?
Right. And there are some tricky edge cases too, right? Like there's one of the Debian code names means like sort of like release candidate or like testing, but it like what version it means depends on like what they're testing. Like I think it moves.
SID and unstable and testing, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised that they put code names there instead of version numbers in the examples.
because nerds wrote this document. That's why.
Debian, I would say that Debian, a lot of Debian sources refer, like even the official documents, they always use the name, not the number. It's actually it's harder to find the number that correlates with the name than it is.
Yeah. And Ubuntu as well.
That's interesting. At least the Ubuntu, I don't know, the Ubuntu code names are alphabetical, so you can kind of sort them in your head, which is a big help because I like numbers because they come in order.
I completely agree. So what was the conversation we wanted to have about this? What we're going to do with it? Or
yeah, I think the proposal is to have a config switch that says, I want distro name dash numeric version versus I want distro code name as my distro equals qualifier in the Perl. I think it has to be configurable if we want to do it, but I don't know.
I have one question about this. I'm reading the why is this needed, and it's keying off of there are other tools in the SBOM ecosystem who expect this to like this value to exist.
Right.
And it mentions a certain example where one tool will retrieve the vulnerability data, but it will fail if there's no code name for the distro qualifier. But if this distro if this URL modifier by the spec is optional, then shouldn't the tool still like if it's an optional field, shouldn't the tool provide an answer and not just say that this is an invalid Perl? Like,
Well, we did the
Yeah.
same thing in Grype, say for instance. Like, so if you say let's talk about like Grype, was DB schema v5. So before we did the v6 updates, we were code nameless. So we really depended on that distro being like a name dash a version to be able to really reason about it and create a namespaces off of it. Because our namespaces were oriented by name and version.
right.
And we have another rule of thumb in Grype that's all about, hey, if you know that it's Ubuntu, but you don't know the version, we're not going to search all of Ubuntu for you because you're going to get a plethora of false positives. Like it doesn't make sense to even try to give you results there. So I could kind of say the same thing for these other tools where it's like, well, if that resolution fails for whatever reason, like stop because we're going to give you inaccurate results. For DBV6 for us, we actually kind of don't care anymore. We have all the code names in for Grype. If you give it a fuzzier name, it'll resolve it to like the specific distro in the database, which is great. So from a downstream perspective for us, we're in a bit of a don't care. Like it's like, yeah, we could put in this config switch. We don't have any changes in Grype that really need to be done.
Right.
I think. And we would be doing other tools a favor. Like, hey, like if folks are using other tooling, great. We want to be able to work with them too. So like having this config switch just helps folks out.
Yeah. And that makes sense. And the issue I closed in relation to this was where the non-numbered like Debian, I think Trixie and Sid are like unstable and release candidate or something. And they don't have a number yet. So there was no way to put those in the Perl. Like they would just end up with Debian in the Perl. And that wasn't enough for Grype matching. So I think having this switch makes a lot of sense. I think by default it should be in the current position it's in, right? It should do like Debian -11 unless the
there.
switch is on.
Or over here.
I have
On the right.
Yeah, over
Oh,
here, the
okay.
distro equals. We're not talking about the
namespace.
Yeah.
Perl.
the namespace.
I have the probably unpopular opinion that I think what we're doing right now is I would consider a bug. I don't think that putting the code name is necessarily the solution, but we're duplicating the distro. We're also putting it in the namespace of the Perl, and then we're duplicating that data in the same thing dash, and then like the number's absolutely valuable, but
The spec actually suggests that, I thought.
Yeah.
Can we go
There's a
back to the
method
examples?
to duplicate the data. It's ugly, but
Yeah.
Right, like the bottom example is essentially what we're doing. That was just on the screen.
Fedora namespace Fedora-25. It is repetitive, but
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bug, but I agree. It's definitely not the smallest it could be. But I
Yeah.
also kind of get why like you would want to put it in both places, because then you have this like parsing conditionality, right? Like okay, what distro is this? I'm going to look for the distro qualifier unless I see a namespace and like.
Well, also those are different things, right? The first Fedora is the type of the package.
Well, I thought the
That's one
RPM
over.
was the type of package
What's that?
because it has package RPM. So I thought it has like on the bottom example. So I thought RPM was a kind of package. What is Fedora?
Right, but the namespace. But you could have like a flavor of Fedora that's
Right.
They're both Fedora, but the distro has a specific name. It's this one or that one. I mean, I don't see them as redundant because they can actually be communicating different pieces of information. It just happens in this case because it's Fedora.
Actually, I have a
Perl spec type, which is like Bitnami, which has, the namespace is Bitnami, but the distro is Debian 12, which I thought was interesting in their examples.
Yeah. Would you expect to see like, so say like we're talking about Linux Mint, the namespace be Ubuntu and then the distro be Mint? I haven't
Yeah,
thought about that before, but I mean,
I actually would. That's how, if you
Alright.
just asked me without consulting the internets, how I would write that down, that's what I would do.
Which is
gotcha.
interesting because some of the packages in the Mint archive will be Mint, or original Mint, and some of them will be Ubuntu because they use both. And the same with Pop OS. Some of their packages are their Debian packages, the Debs, and you're running Pop OS, but the, I don't know, kernel or bin utils or whatever came from Ubuntu.
Yep. I know it's not clean, but
Yeah, here they say the namespace. Okay, so I'm looking at the deb Perl types. They're saying the namespace is the vendor.
yeah,
I think for each distro flavor that you might have a different answer for what a vendor is. So
Okay. Where were we? Where are we with this then? Is this
right.
what state are we in? It's
What-
ready already.
Well, I think we were saying we agree to put in this config switch, but I mean, I want to make certain I parsed the rest of the conversation. Is it B, we want the switch to stay with the same behavior we had today, or are we saying something else? I might have missed it.
Yeah, I think
Some-
I said I wanted the default behavior to be what it is today, and Keith wanted the opposite, and I was sort of mostly biasing for not making people change things if they have parsing scripts or whatever. But Keith has a good point too, that we're sort of putting the distro in two places. So I don't know.
Well, but I agree with what Dan's saying too, that it's not actually the same thing. They are in some examples saying the exact same thing, but they could have different values.
Yeah, I
Sorry, Keith, you're about to
rescinded
say.
my thing. I missed a bit of a detail there.
And then, so it really just comes down, do we want to set the default one way versus the other? I think since we're talking about Syft, we kind of have no choice, like to keep the default the way it is today, because it could actually break folks. It happens to not break Grype because we did DBV6, but it's really easy to imagine because of how DBV5 was that you could break folks. So I think we have no choice actually. But Syft 2, we could change it.
Is it settled?
Yeah.
Does someone need to leave a comment, or what do we want to do with this?
I think it's settled. I could leave the next comment. Yeah.
Sweet. Nice. I do love an engaged person who's replying promptly and super interested in this getting sorted. I really appreciate that. So thank you, KCHR. Right. I don't think we've got time to start something else because it's 2 minutes to the hour, and everyone needs a break. So thank you all, as always, for getting some work done in front of everyone. And thanks to all those people who filed issues, pull requests, and so on that we talked about. I'll see you all next week. Have a good weekend, everyone. Cheerio.
See you, folks.